Good morning and welcome to NEEP's May Ready, Set, Scale webinar. We kicked this series off in January with the intent of highlighting policies, solutions, and programs that are ready to replicate and grow. Over the year, we're covering a broad range of topics from new policies and laws to innovative program models. Today, we're talking about building energy performance standards policies, and specifically how to design and implement this powerful tool for equitable outcomes. We will continue the conversation about building performance standards in a deep dive session at our in-person summit in Baltimore on June 13th through 15th. Building performance standards are one of 10 topics that we've teed up for small workshop facilitated discussions with topical experts. IMT will join us at the summit, and representatives from the Department of Energy and the Environmental Protection Agency will be in the room as well. You'll also have the opportunity to dive deep into setting goals and metrics for equity in policy and program design, innovative financing tools, designing one-stop shop energy efficiency programs, and many other topics. We're also having leaders come to answer your questions in both panel and case study formats. And I'm really excited because we're bringing back our popular demystifying sessions. In these sessions, a moderator and an expert break down topics that we've all been pretending we already understand. So don't wait, join us at the summit. Don't wait to register. We have a limited space and we have a hotel discount that's running out this week. You can check out the program and the speakers who are from all over the region and across the country on NEEP's website. We'll make sure to drop the link into the chat. And we look forward to seeing you in a few weeks in Baltimore. So with that, I will welcome Andy Winslow, NEEP's Senior Buildings and Community Solutions Associate, to get us started. Hi, Andy.
Hey, Era, how's it going?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome,
Great topic.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. My name is Andy Winslow. I am a senior associate on the Buildings and Communities team here at NEEP. And before getting into the webinar, there are a few logistical items that I wanted to cover. The first being that this webinar is being recorded, and the slides and the recording will be sent out to everybody and posted online after the event. Also, in order to improve our accessibility, we have enabled closed captioning, and you can disable this feature by clicking the button located in the bottom right-hand corner of the Zoom toolbar. Everyone will be muted, but we do have the chat box open if there are any comments or discussion items you'd like to pose. And there's also a Q&A box where you can ask questions of the panelists today. Our series sponsor for the Ready, Set, Scale webinar series is the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Thank you so much for making this really engaging webinar series possible. NEEP wouldn't be where it is today if it wasn't for our funders who are listed here, as well as our allies. Thank you so much for everything that you do to support NEEP and helping us support you. And finally, our state partners. Listed here are all of our state partners, with a shout out to New Jersey, who just joined us this year. We couldn't do what we do without you, and the states, the allies, and the funders are all part of the partnerships that NEEP partners with. And with that, I believe we can get into our session today. So the format of today's session will largely be discussion based. It will be a kind of casual coffee side chat discussion. And we will be discussing the topic of centering equity within building performance standards. A building performance standard is a policy/program that can be implemented at many different levels, whether that be federal, state, local, or even within a specific organization. The goal of a performance standard is to reduce energy usage or carbon emissions from existing buildings. And when I use the word buildings, I am not talking about single family residential buildings. I am talking about commercial buildings and large multifamily buildings. These are often the contribute the most to greenhouse gas emissions and energy usage. So we're thinking about buildings on the order of 25,000 square feet and above, 50,000 square feet and above, the really, really big players. A performance standard operates by setting a minimum level of performance, whether that be energy usage or carbon emissions or an energy score, that buildings must comply with. And if they don't, they will be penalized in some way. So a performance standard is like a benchmarking program, but it's got some teeth to it. It's easy to think of a performance standard as being a hindrance to building owners, a capital expenditure for these upgrades, but building performance standards offer many, many, many benefits. It's all about updating buildings, making them more weather resistant, resilient, making them healthier, more comfortable, and of course, lowering energy usage and thus lowering utility bills. So today, we're going to be talking about how a building performance standard can be designed so that these benefits are provided across the board to everybody, whether they be socially and environmental justice communities, historically marginalized communities. We have to go into this thinking, knowing that there are people who are starting behind the rest. We want them to have these benefits, but they also need to be given resources to make sure that the capital hindrance is not a barrier to them. When we think about equity in this lens of a building performance standard, we're thinking of a few different groups of people. We're thinking of people who live in affordable housing, or we're thinking of affordable housing buildings. We're thinking of buildings that might be in a not so great part of town that are kind of run down, not as desirable, that might be starting a little bit behind. And we're talking about communities that have been historically marginalized for a number of different social and environmental reasons. Performance standards have been taking off. It began in 2019 with the city of Washington, D.C., followed closely by the city of St. Louis, who I'm very excited to say we will be hearing from the St. Louis perspective, and we'll be hearing from three wonderful speakers about who all played a hand in the development of the St. Louis building performance standard. It started with these few players and it has exploded, where states are getting involved, the federal government is getting involved, cities and towns, both large and small, everyone is getting involved. And we have this opportunity to design these policies from the beginning to make sure that they are equitable. So today, I'm going to invite my speakers on now. So please turn your cameras on. I'm really excited to kick off this discussion about the city of St. Louis, how the city developed its performance standard, what stakeholder engagement was performed, how it shaped the policy, and what other people need to consider as they are developing their performance standard. So, well, let's just kick things off. We'll just do some quick self-introductions, and then we will get into discussion questions. And again, audience, please ask questions in the Q&A box, and please start having discussions in the chat box, and we will try and weave in your questions with the questions that I have today. So I'm gonna throw it over to Emily. Thank you all for joining today, my wonderful, wonderful speakers. Emily, I'm gonna toss it to you for your self-introduction.
Great, thank you, Andy. My name is Emily Andrews. I'm the Executive Director of the U.S. Green Building Council, Missouri Gateway Chapter. We're based in St. Louis, and we have been a partner with the City of St. Louis, specifically their building division, on working on policies that support climate protection and energy efficiency. So starting with benchmarking several years ago, and then also the building energy performance standard. So we've assisted with a lot of stakeholder engagement, some technical input, engaging our members in the process, and then also providing education like benchmarking 101 type sessions and help sessions throughout the year. So that's been our role in this effort. And I've been with the chapter for I guess, 16 years, which seems crazy. And we've really done a lot of different things, but this work with the city has really been, not to be cheesy, but has really been energizing for me, and I think for our organization. It's been a lot of fun and really challenging to do this work. So it's one of the things I get excited about. So.
Awesome, thank you. And I will toss the ball to Jessica.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks for having me. So I'm Jessica Miller. I'm the Associate Director of Policy Strategy and Engagement at the Institute for Market Transformation. IMT, if you don't know us, is a nonprofit that works at the intersection of policy, business, and community to accelerate demand for high-performing buildings. So we work nationally. At IMT, I work directly with jurisdictions across the country that are working on BPS, and was lucky enough to be one of the leads that worked with Emily and the building division to design the St. Louis BPS, and still working with that team now to support on implementation. I've also been the lead internally at IMT for a body of work that we've been developing that really relates to this topic called BPS Social Priorities Modules. So these are policy briefs that kind of look for ways to weave in some of the intersecting issues like health and like resilience and like affordability into the BPS kind of policy context. So I believe we'll be able to send out some links to those as a follow-up. The health IAQ brief was released a few months ago, and affordable housing and resilience should be released some point this week, which is exciting. And the last thing I wanted to mention is I've been working with IMT on supporting the White House's announcement of the National BPS Coalition. So it's 34, I think soon to be 35 jurisdictions have signed on to move towards passing an equitable building performance standard. So note that word equitable, because we're going to hold them to that by Earth Day 2024. So as Andy mentioned, there's a ton of momentum right now and an exciting kind of opportunity to get this right. So looking forward to talking more about it.
Awesome, thank you, Jessica. And last but not least, Dana.
Hi, I'm Dana Gray with Tower Grove Neighborhoods Community Development, and we're an affordable housing provider in St. Louis City, and we have mostly scattered site, 4 family properties. I'm also a landlord myself, and we are working with lots of landlords across the region through partnerships and memberships in other organizations, one of which is the Energy Efficiency for All Collaborative. And the mission of that organization is to improve efficiency and affordability in low-income multifamily housing through engaging utilities and building power with local communities. Before the building energy performance standard was established, I had been working with our organization to do several energy projects, improving the efficiency in some of our buildings and benchmarking. And so that led me to participating in our stakeholder meetings for establishing the building energy performance standard in our city.
Awesome, thank you so much. Well, I'm really excited to have you all on the line here with your different broad perspectives. I think will be really, really valuable for our listeners as they all try and think about developing a building performance standard and how learn from your successes, your challenges. I think to kick things off, Emily, I think you were the most involved in the development of the policy, and I'm wondering if you could just give a quick overview of where it came from and what the timeline was like associated with it.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I would like to also say that part of the reason that we don't have a representative from the city of St. Louis here is because they've recently had some staff transition in their Office of Building Performance. So the individual who I had been working with over many years, Rajiv Ravlapati, he's not with the city anymore. But now we have some really great staff. Katerina Mikulova and James Kelly have just come on earlier this year and are really charging ahead and doing a great job, but they don't have the history of the policy. So that's kind of where I'm standing in today. Just want to provide a little bit of background there. I think Katerina's on the call today as well, so glad to have her here. But in terms of background, we've really been working with the city since about, I would say, 2016 or so. Initially, they joined the City Energy Project in the second round of that program and passed benchmarking legislation in 2017 that requires buildings 50,000 square feet and greater to report energy and water use annually. And from the very beginning, that included multifamily buildings. So, I know a lot of cities didn't include multifamily buildings in their benchmarking, but St. Louis did. So the data that was being collected made it kind of clear that we have a lot of opportunity for improvement here. I mean, compared to some of the national medians, our buildings are not performing as well. So that was one driver. There is also the driver that the city has made a commitment to reach net zero by 2050, and buildings are a huge contributor to the greenhouse gas emissions. And then the American Cities Climate Challenge comes into play. The city of St. Louis became part of that, which, as many of you already probably know, that focuses specifically on driving greenhouse gas emission reductions down in the building and transportation sectors. So that led us to really look at, like, what are the next steps after benchmarking? What should the next policy be to address these energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reductions in our buildings? And we started that stakeholder engagement process to get us to the building energy performance standard. So that's just a little background. Now, the legislation was introduced in the very beginning of 2020 and then passed in April of 2020, right as we were going into the pandemic. So it was exciting to have that happen in kind of a relatively quick order.
Awesome. And it's my understanding that as a part of the St. Louis Building Performance Standard, that there are a few different pathways that a building owner can take to achieve the there's an alternative compliance pathway. And I'm wondering if Jessica, if you might be able to talk a little bit about that.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And Emily, please jump in. So there are 4 compliance pathways for this first compliance cycle. So the St. Louis standard is set up to kind of be recalculated every 5 to 7 years, depending on the group. And St. Louis did give additional compliance time to qualified affordable housing and houses of worship. So the first compliance period for all other buildings is 2025, and the second is 2027 for those underserved buildings. So there are 4 paths, as I said. I think we're hoping to encourage, the large majority to meet the standard set for their property type. But we have developed an alternative compliance path so that buildings that need some additional flexibility. So, maybe an affordable housing property, the 2 additional years doesn't allow them to match up with a planned capital upgrade or refinancing period where they have the access to capital that's needed to do this work to improve their energy performance. They can submit an ASHRAE level 2 audit, as well as a little bit of explanation around why they, are choosing this alternative path. So that was sort of a way to give building owners, an additional layer of flexibility if they can't meet sort of the mark on the time that, as it's laid out in the legislation. There's also an early adopter pathway. So sort of that carrot approach to really encourage property owners to do more. So since this standard is recalculated in, those 5-year cycles, building owners don't know kind of what's coming next, but because they know what the marks are in this first one, if they do more, they exceed the standard by certain percentages, they can comply for an additional cycle or an additional 2 cycles. So we really wanted to do something to drive kind of people to do more than just hitting the mark, if it was feasible for them. Emily, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Do you want to cover the narrowing the gap?
Yeah, so we did include for this first compliance cycle, a narrowing the gap path where you can comply by kind of narrowing the gap, as we say, between where you are now and the standard. So if you narrow that gap by 50%, you can comply for this first cycle. And that was just sort of, the idea was the St. Louis language and the policy is pretty ambitious. So the standards are high. 65% of building owners will have to take some sort of action to reduce their energy use. And we were looking for a way to minimize sort of work on the building division side. I think one, big consideration when thinking about these policies is the implementation complexity. So for cities that have smaller staffs or have newer staffs, in the case of St. Louis, how do we don't want everyone to submit a custom path. So this was sort of, our way of saying, if you can't meet the standard, but you can do something, this is sort of like a simplified way to do something in the first compliance path and start to build momentum for building owners to do more.
Very cool. You mentioned a few of these mechanisms that are really interesting, like delayed compliance, as well as the alternative compliance pathway. And I'd like to get into how those decisions were made to include those mechanisms. So I'm going to toss the ball over to Dana and ask, what involvement was there from the community, from the affordable housing community, in the development of the performance standard?
We had stakeholder meetings for what seemed like maybe a year and a half. Am I recalling correctly? Emily, you're shaking your head, yes. Where myself and Annika Brendel from the National Housing Trust weighed in to offer insights into how our organizations work with securing funding and lead time that's needed to do capital improvements, and just sharing our perspective with everyone in the room so that they were aware of the unique situation that affordable housing providers are in when you're contemplating large expenditures to improve your building. And then we also would share information about the considerations with our affordable housing colleagues to gather more information from them and then bring that back to the stakeholder meetings.
And Dana, just out of curiosity, when you were in those meetings, what were some of your talking points? What were you hoping to see out of the performance standard?
One, I definitely wanted affordable housing involved because I think you know, it's kind of this stick that oftentimes is needed to ensure that the energy improvements are made. Budgets are so incredibly tight in most affordable housing situations, that they often will take the least cost option, which will not include Energy Star rated appliances or higher energy efficiency HVAC systems. So ensuring that that stick was there, that we had to meet that bar of making buildings more energy efficient. It's often just, you need to point out the obvious, that most business owners are paying their utility bills, so they have an inherent incentive to improve the energy efficiency in their buildings. But when you are a landlord and you are not paying those utility bills, that incentive is not there. It's almost a disincentive, because you are not going to see reduction in your utility costs. You're not paying those bills. So we just have to keep emphasizing the fact that the tenants will see those benefits. It will improve the stability of the building. It will improve the maintenance concerns of the building and make the buildings more durable, more sustainable for long term. So those were some of the concerns we addressed.
Awesome. And Emily, how did these concerns play out in the final product?
Well, I think that we definitely throughout the process were constantly coming back to this idea of, you know, how will this affect affordable housing? How can we make this something that doesn't, you know, that helps those owners and developers and residents and doesn't hurt or hinder them. In the end, I think one of the cool things about introducing this legislation is that we actually opened a comment period. So we drafted the legislation, and then the city opened a comment period, which typically doesn't happen before legislation is introduced. It's just not the process that happens at the Board of Aldermen. Typically it gets introduced and then you have the opportunity to comment during the committee process. But we put it out there prior to that for several weeks, and Dana and her team came back with some really specific comments on how this could be better for, you know, from an equity standpoint around specifically around affordable housing. And so, you know, we didn't have the extended compliance cycle in there originally in the first draft. That was something that came from the comments that Dana and her group submitted through the comment period. And it wasn't that it was mostly just that we didn't think about it, you know, so that was why having that comment period was so great. And we did actually make a number of changes based on the suggestions that came in. And, you know, before then it was introduced to the Board of Aldermen. So that was really how it changed, and so extended that comment period. And then the other thing I think is that, you know, we heard loud and clear how important it is that people are going to need assistance with compliance. And so, you know, while a lot of this was going on, we were also talking about creating some sort of hub, resource hub. I know the DC has the innovation hub that was created kind of to help with implementation. And we've launched a building energy exchange, St. Louis here locally, to be a part of that. And you know, we have a lot of lofty goals for that initiative, but one of the very first things is to address compliance and to address compliance with those buildings that need help the most, which is really affordable housing, and then perhaps buildings in underserved parts of the city that may not have professional building management staff, or just might be struggling in other ways. So
one question that just came in from the audience is whether St. Louis has a definition for underserved buildings and how it's defined, if anything.
Well, the legislation specifically calls out an extended compliance cycle for qualified affordable housing and houses of worship. So that's the definition that's in the legislation. We don't have a definition for underserved in the legislation.
Jessica, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I was going to say the same thing.
Okay, awesome. Well, Jessica, another chat came in that I think you can answer. There was a question about how greenhouse gas reductions are tracked and reported. And I think the answer here is that it's energy usage that's being reported. Is that correct?
Yeah, so St. Louis made the decision to orient our building performance standard around energy. So the metric being tracked is energy use intensity. So there are some other building performance standards, New York City and Boston, that are using greenhouse gas as a metric. But in St. Louis, we decided early on, I think, to orient around energy efficiency, for a number of reasons. The climate, the grid components, kind of, ease for building owners reporting information.
Awesome, thank you. Another question came in, this one on the topic of support or financing models. The question is, were there any tariff changes or shared savings models proposed or implemented?
I'm not sure I understand the tariff side of things, but we have worked very closely with our utilities, our electric and natural gas utilities, to make sure that their incentives will continue to be available to assist building owners, and really try to funnel a lot of people into their incentive programs, which on the affordable housing side specifically are pretty rich and offer a lot. So that's been a really important piece of the puzzle for us. And then I would also say that the Building Energy Exchange, St. Louis is looking at, what are the options for financing, and, is there some sort of, revolving loan fund or green bank pool that we can get going. I know a lot of people are talking about that right now. There's a lot of different resources available. And then I feel like, and Dana and her group also put together a really great resource on financing specifically for affordable housing, a report that kind of outlines all the different options that are out there in the St. Louis area for folks. So
yeah, I was going to follow up with Dana about what resources are available for the affordable housing community, or what resources don't exist and would you like to see?
Well, we put together a report that was a collaboration between Renew Missouri and Tower Grove Community Development on all the financing options here in our region. And they include typical bank loans and CDFIs and PACE financing. Here in the state of Missouri, we have what's called the Linked Deposit Program, which is a loan that offers rates 30% below market. And then the many low-income housing projects use low-income housing tax credit through their state finance institution. Here, we don't have very robust incentives through our state finance institution. So that's something that we've been working on and making comments on their QAP to get them to better incentivize energy and make that more of a priority. So the things that are not there is through the state finance institution. It's that's where I think it's lacking in our neck of the woods.
And there's a follow-up question in the chat, Dana. Can you talk about any studies on the uptake of those finance programs?
I cannot. I wish
Okay.
I could.
Thank you for being honest.
I keep promoting the Missouri Link Deposit Program because it seems like such a great opportunity, but I feel that every time I talk about it, it's like I just introduced a subject that no one's ever heard of. So I'm going to keep talking about it.
Excellent. While we're on the topic of resources, Jessica, I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the innovation hub that IMT put together for DC and some of the support resources that it has there.
Yeah, sure. So the Innovation Hub in DC is kind of run through IMT, funded by the Department of Energy and Environment in the district in DC. It is kind of a clearinghouse of resources around compliance. They have a lot of really great sort of interactive tools that have been built in the last few months to walk owners through sort of different decisions around compliance. On the equity side, they were actually able to run a pilot where affordable housing, I think they had funding to support 25 or so different affordable properties kind of required to comply with BEPS, where they kind of did some matchmaking with a technical assistance provider to walk them through kind of where they are now and what steps they needed to take, and then connected them to different resources that DC has. So DC has sort of, different incentives from the utility side, from the city side. They have the DC Sustainable Energy Utility as well. So there's kind of a few different pools of funding, and the DC Green Bank. So that was really cool. And I think got a lot of good feedback from those owners. It was really helpful. So I think they're hoping to be able to, extend that level of service. The hubs are, St. Louis is kind of, in the beginning stages of this as well. It's sort of, figuring out what the needs are in the community, how to, sustain funding for the level of support the community needs, and how to evolve the model as building owners start to do more and more. I know Emily has a big vision for the St. Louis BEX, kind of, potentially starting to be more of a regional hub, as it grows. So I think there's a lot of promise in this approach. A lot of cities are kind of following the lead of DC and St. Louis and trying to start their own hub. So
it's one thing to have financial incentives spread out across for various different funding streams, and it's another thing to bring them all together into one place and make people aware of the funding that's available and how to access it. And on the topic of awareness, I have a question for Dana. You mentioned when you were, there's this financial, I forget what it would there's this financial mechanism that you say you bring up and no one knows what it is. And when I was talking also with Emily, earlier, she mentioned that it's been very challenging to talk about performance standards because a lot of people don't know what they are. So how can we better explain performance standards to people? What can we do to raise awareness? And this is, I'm going to toss it to Dana and then maybe to Emily or whoever has anything to add. But I mean, we need to raise awareness among the building owners and the general population, as well as policymakers and the people who could pass and implement.
My first words of advice is don't use acronyms. They just create barriers between us and the people we are trying to explain things to. And it's not unique to this industry. It is everywhere, and it is just creating barriers. When I talk about building performance standards, I relay it as it's an equivalent to the miles per gallon you would look at for an automobile, and try to put it in the most simple terms, and then it makes sense.
Any other panelists have anything to add to the how we can better explain performance standards?
I think Dana's explanation is great. I think that really, it just takes people hearing it multiple times, right? In some cases before it sinks in. And, I'll just give an example. I have a board member, who's been on our board for a couple of years. We've been talking about these building performance standards for a couple of years. We're doing all kinds of events, info sessions, Q&A sessions, putting out the draft legislation, encouraging people to submit. And then all of a sudden, there's a project that's on this board member's desk that will eventually have to meet this standard. It's a new development, a redevelopment of an existing building. And in trying to kind of model out what the energy performance of that building might be, they quickly realize that, oh my gosh, maybe it's not going to meet the standard. And now it really means something to me as an architect because I'm applying it to a project. So I think sometimes it just takes, several different presentations, somebody connecting the dot, a light bulb going off. In some cases, like right now, it takes people getting a letter from the city saying that they're not on track to meet the performance standard in the next couple of years. And then they're like, oh gosh, this is something I need to pay attention to. So there have to be, we're really trying every angle to get in front of people through, presentations at different building industry organizations, one-on-one conversations, info sessions, whatever it takes to get the word out. We're working all different angles.
I feel like
Go ahead, Dana.
All of the sessions that you've hosted, Emily, on benchmarking have been extraordinarily helpful. So many buildings don't have a consultant that they're hiring, but they're trying to get somebody in-house trained to benchmark the buildings. And so I think that that's been key to educating property owners and managers on tracking their energy use and how to measure it and how to record it. I know I've been attending many of those, and I'm very grateful for those training sessions you've been hosting.
Thanks, Dana. It also helps too with the building performance standards to see action at the national level through the coalition. I think that's something I've pointed to a lot. Like, this isn't just something that the city of St. Louis is doing. This is something that 30 plus cities are looking at and making a commitment to. This is a market signal. This is something you have to pay attention to. It's not going away. Because I think sometimes people think like, well, what's the path of least resistance? If I don't comply, what will happen? That's not the attitude we want to see, but I think that is the attitude of some people out there. So trying to raise awareness about why this is important and that we're not the only ones doing it is, I think, really has been helpful.
It just goes to show how much of what goes into a performance standard is about communication and collaboration with all the different the different pieces. Jessica, I'm wondering if you wanted to share some best practices that you've learned while you've been developing your social awareness toolkit, or the toolkit.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So I think the first place to start is to, kind of acknowledge the mistakes that organizations, like IMT have made in this space in the past, and that is sort of the model of coming into communities as a national organization and offering sort of solutions to problems, when we're not sort of on the ground and aware of, what the local needs are and what the priorities are. So there's a lot of, momentum sort of in the space of environmental nonprofits to change that paradigm and to, start sort of from the ground up instead of from the top down. So I think that, the first thing is to, really do community engagement, work with community-based organizations who are on the front lines, experiencing sort of the impacts of climate now. The summer is going to be too hot, and there are people that don't have air conditioning, conditioning this summer, and how do we start to build solutions that address those problems, in the short term and longer term. So I think, we're, as sort of in parallel to the National BPS Coalition, trying to fundraise, because that type of community engagement really requires resources and compensation to allow, smaller community-based organizations to participate fully in this process. So it's not just kind of these same faces that you're used to seeing, sort of giving our ideas, but really letting people share solutions that, they might know better than we do. So I think that's kind of the number one lesson that we're trying to learn and integrate into our work. I think, the work that I've been doing is really sort of based on the idea that, building performance standards are a flexible framework. So one thing I always say is, it's Emily, I'm sure will laugh at this, but, high performing buildings outside the context of policy have been defined for a long time as being inclusive of things other than just energy and carbon reductions. But, for some good reasons, city departments are typically somewhat siloed, and building performance in the policy context really has just focused on sort of energy and carbon reduction. But for people who own and operate buildings, it can make a lot of sense to start building some of these policies in a more intersectional way. So we're not saying, meet this energy target, but now you're dealing with COVID and you have to, improve the ventilation, but that's kind of coming from another, piece of legislation. And, those two things may not have talked or, coordinated in terms of the requirements. So that's kind of the idea of this work, is there are a lot of, intersections in the built environment that we could have of kind of talking about in a more holistic way. And I think the other piece is, we talked about this in some of kind of our prep discussions, is really knowing, doing some analysis around the buildings that you're touching in the performance standard context. So, having data going in around, like how many affordable housing buildings will be touched by the policy if we use this square footage threshold. What if we ratchet it down? What does that mean? And not just affordable housing, but like going deeper, what types of affordable housing are touched? Are they subsidized? Are they unsubsidized? How does that match up with, what incentives are available? Like, what are the gaps? How do we start to line up resources early on so that those building owners can, be at the front of the line? Those are the kinds of things that, we want to see happening. But there's a lot of kind of creativity and flexibility, I think, available in this type of a policy. So I'm kind of excited to see, what comes next as, cities start to integrate more.
That's a good segue into another audience question. What is next for St. Louis's, the implementation of St. Louis's performance standard?
Well, it's, in the process, of being implemented. So the compliance deadline, is Jessica mentioned earlier, is 2025 for most buildings. And that's for 2024 data that's submitted through the benchmarking process. So at this point, the letters have gone out, the notifications about BEPS have gone, about the building performance standard, have gone out to owners. The building energy exchange is, has been launched and is available for people to, access resources through BX. And then, just yesterday, we had a meeting that the city set up with St. Louis Public Schools to just talk through, like, okay, here are your buildings that have to comply, here's where they are, what's your strategy, how can we be helpful? So doing some really specific outreach to different sectors is, I think, part of what is coming next, and trying to really make sure that those owners have the tools that they need to move towards compliance. Dana and I also worked with the Building Energy Exchange to submit a request to the city of St. Louis to divert some of their stimulus funds to assist affordable housing with compliance. That's not been 100% confirmed. I know that DC has been able to do that, but that's something that we're, still trying to make that happen, even if it's not, all the money that we need, at least some of the money. So really trying to move some of those things forward.
Very exciting. We just have a few more minutes left. There's one more item that I wanted to touch on for the audience, and that is on the topic of advisory boards. I know that St. Louis has such a board, and I'm wondering what they do and who sits on it.
So this is a kind of a unique feature of the city of St. Louis's legislation to create this Building Energy Improvement Board. And I think I'm doing this off of memory. I think there are 9 seats with a couple of alternates. Most of the folks on the board have to be residents of the city of St. Louis, so there's some of it, some seats available to, maybe people who are building owners that don't actually live in the city. And it's meant to be a wide representation of people who are connected to the buildings that have to comply. So affordable housing representation, financing representation. The chair of the board is the former executive director of the St. Louis Housing Authority, who's now retired, and that's been a great person to engage. The owner, the facilities manager of our largest hospital facility sits on the board. We have several people from the energy consulting and architecture space that also sit on the board. So trying to bring a wide variety of perspectives to the table to assist the city with the implementation, really to oversee the implementation. And their role was kind of twofold in terms of, like, initially that board actually approved the standards, the targets that buildings have to meet, which are based on local benchmarking data. And now they're really focused on the implementation and providing that oversight to the city in the process of implementing the performance standard.
Awesome. I just want to give another big thank you to my panelists for that really, really engaging and insightful conversation. We are at that time of the webinar where we will be wrapping up. So thank you very, very much. We have a few wrap-up slides to go through before we officially sign off. Just another reminder that the NEEP Summit will be on June 13, 14, and 15, and we would love to see everyone there. If you are interested in building performance standards, there will be another deep dive. We will be having a session on performance standards, which will get into the different roles that the different stakeholders that are involved in a performance standard and what success looks like to each of them. We are also hiring. We are looking for a digital marketing associate. So if you or anyone you know is good at graphic design or making things look pretty, making reports look digestible and easy to read instead of just a bunch of words, please let us know. We are interested in talking to you. And finally, our next Ready, Set, Scale webinar will be on July 26th on the topic of residential retrofitting at scale, a whole home approach. And this involves combining efficiency with electrification and renewable energy for a truly zero carbon home. We are at the top of the hour. Thank you all so much for attending. And again, panelists, thank you for your engaging discussion. We will send out the slides and the recording after the webinar is over. I hope everyone has a good rest of your day.